Catholics were free to do what their consciences told them to about this issue. And many people will acknowledge that really right after that, that's what was taught in the seminaries even, of the United States and around the world, that the church would eventually change its teaching and that priests should not trouble the consciences of the faithful about this issue. The Canadian bishops around the world put out statements supposedly in support of Humanae Vitae. Many of them were wobbly, and one of them was the Canadian bishops. One thing, this is what a passage from their statement says. It says, in accord with the accepted principles of moral theology, if these persons have tried sincerely, people who don't accept Humanae Vitae, he said, if these persons have tried sincerely but without success to pursue a line of conduct in keeping with the given directives, they may be safely assured that whoever honestly chooses that course which seems right to him does so in good conscience. There's a problem here in that statement, choosing what course seems right to him. We're going to talk about what the conscience is, but one thing it isn't our opinion about what's right and what's wrong. Right? A conscience isn't, we hear this phrase all the time, you've got your opinion, I've got my opinion, who's to say what's right, who's to say what's wrong. But the conscience isn't opinion. And we're going to talk about the conscience really is listening to the voice of God within. And so you're not saying it's my view versus somebody else's view. You're saying I'm trying to find out what God thinks, not what I think about something. What does God want me to do in this situation, not what I think is right in this situation. John Henry Newman, who was one of the great writers about conscience, he talked about people who took refuge in the phrase conscience to do whatever they wanted. And he said when they advocate the rights of conscience, they in no sense mean the rights of the creature, but the right of thinking, speaking, writing, and acting according to their judgment or their humor, without any thought of God at all. I mean, honestly, sometimes we'll say, my conscience doesn't bother me. You say you might be taking a couple reams of paper home from the office, and you might say, my conscience doesn't bother me. And then you say, yeah, I worked overtime for 3 hours on Saturday, and so this is just sort of compensation. That might be true. But the point is, you really didn't ask the question, what does God think? Right? You're just saying, I'm not troubled by this, but you didn't really ask the question, what does God think? And that's always the question that the conscience asks. You might have noticed in the last 45, 60, 50 years, you haven't really heard much about contraception from the pulpit. Again, what I hear from people, priests, is that those who were taught in the seminaries between about 1970 up into the 1990s, and it's changed wonderfully, radically in the last 15, 20 years, they were told not to teach this teaching. Right? In fact, I don't know about you, but I rarely hear priests talk about any moral issue from the pulpit. I don't hear people telling me not to be a racist or not to be greedy or not to be lazy. Right? I'm generally told to be kind. And I do work on that. But I think if they told me not to be greedy, I'd work on that more too. And if they told me not to be lazy, I'd work on that too. Right? And so priests were taught to stick much more, in a certain strange sense, close to the gospel, which doesn't seem to have included, in a sense, teaching about moral issues, which of course Christ did really all the time. It wasn't always that way. In this book, Catholics and Contraception, Leslie Woodcock Tentler tells how between about 1910 and 1960, Catholics were very well informed about the Church's teaching on contraception. That there would be various missions in parishes in Advent and Lent, and priests, Passionists, Redemptorists, Jesuits would go around the country. And at some point, we have the record of what they gave. They would give a talk usually on Wednesday night, which would be the sex talk. And they would talk about you shouldn't fornicate, you shouldn't commit adultery, you shouldn't masturbate, you shouldn't use contraception. And Catholics lived by this teaching. By 1960, 66% of Catholics had never contracepted. Right? And they were living in a largely contraceptive culture. Again, the pill didn't come out until right around 1960. But Protestants were using the condom and the diaphragm. There was a largely contraceptive culture by 1960. But Catholics weren't. And part of it was because they were well informed about the Church's teaching. Professor Tentler does not accept the Church's teaching. She is one who thinks the Church should change its teaching. But the testimony that she gives is that Catholics were very proud to be Catholic and very proud to have large families. They felt that they were living in a very radical Christian way and be very non-materialistic, unlike much of the rest of the culture. So it's quite a remarkable book. I at one time had thought that maybe the church had never much taught its teaching on contraception. I thought maybe it was based largely on obedience, because my own parents had 4 children in 5 years, and were on a very lower end of the economic scale. And my mother went to her doctor, and she said to him, "Dr. O'Connor, John and I are having so many children so quickly. What are we going to do? We have enough money." And he said, "Listen, Ann, you're Catholic and I'm Catholic, and that's an end to that." And my mother went home, and my father said, "What did Dr. O'Connor say?" And so he said, "He's Catholic and we're Catholic, and that's an end to that." And so my dad went, "Oh, okay." They practiced rhythm, I'm sure heroically, for 7 years, and then had a surprise pregnancy, and another 2 years and had another surprise pregnancy. There's 6 of us all together. My dad said it worked out well. He said he always wanted 4 children. My mother wanted 2, and they both got what they wanted. He also says that the one thing, if you have this feeling in your heart at all, you should any remote figment of it in your being, you should say it to your children. My father's always said that the one thing he regrets is that he didn't have more children. Right? He said that his children are what have given him the most meaning, the most happiness, etc. in his life. Now, I know there's many people, for very many reasons, need to limit their family size, and I'm not one of these that think that you're meant to have as many babies as your body can bear. But it is true that for most people, having children is the most important and wonderful thing that they've ever done. And our culture has begun to make us think that it's somehow foolish to want to have a large family, that there's something wrong with that. So again, the testimony of my parents was that they were simply faithful Catholics with a faithful Catholic doctor, and for them it worked out, at least for them, it worked out very well. The Philippine Bishops in 1990 made this statement that I find remarkable. They said, "It is said that when seeking ways of regulating births, only 5% of you consult God. That means only 5% aren't using contraception. In the face of this unfortunate fact, we, your pastors, have been remiss. How few are there among you whom we have reached? There have been some couples eager to share their expertise and values on birth regulation with others. They did not receive adequate support from their priests. We did not give them due attention, believing then this ministry consisted merely of imparting a technique best left to married couples." They go on to say, "Only recently have we discovered how deep your yearning is for God to be present in your married lives. But we did not know then how to help you discover God's presence and activity in your mission of Christian parenting. Afflicted with doubts about alternatives to contraceptive technology, we abandoned you to your confused and lonely consciences with a lame excuse. We, the Filipino bishops, told you, follow what your conscience tells you. How little we realized that it was our consciences that needed to be formed first. A greater concern would have led us to discover that religious hunger in you." I didn't think I'd lived so long to see such a statement, right? An apology for our bishops of not teaching what they were supposed to be teaching, right? And I suspect they were badly formed, right? I can see it all the way. We have gone to one of the biggest stories of the turn of the century is the Catholic seminaries in the United States. All of them are better than they were 20 years ago, and some of them are spectacular. Right? I happen to be in one of the spectacular ones at the University of Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit. And our young men are going out of that seminary with a zeal that is remarkable. I don't mean to scandalize you, but we have a group of men every week that go to a strip joint. But they just stay outside and they pray. Right? They pray. They pray for the women in there. They pray for the men. And of course, our culture is such that the police have come to harass them and tell them that they're not allowed to be there. Right? Praying. They don't do anything. They don't talk. They don't shout. They don't have posters. They just pray. But it bothers the people inside. But there's men outside praying. They've got a statement from a lawyer that makes it very clear that they have perfect rights to do that. Those rights might be taken away from us. But at any rate, these are remarkable young men. Right? Their love for women has made them show up outside of a strip joint to say this shouldn't be going on. It's disrespectful of women. Right? And be there and pray. Right? What is this conscience? You know, it's often most of us, we have voices inside. Right? Voices inside. Good angels and bad angels. We have all kinds of voices inside. We talk to ourselves all day long. Really, from the minute you start lying in bed, you start having a conversation.